Asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. La'asok b'divrei Torah. 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 Okay, and again, I apologize. Is there a tzedakah box here? If you could, someone could pass some money over there. Okay, so we are finished with our section on meditation and mysticism. Has anyone been meditating before we totally leave this topic?
I have a question.
I know, me neither.
So I read through most of this, and it was talking about the Shema, and it starts off saying, well, you say the Shema twice a day, but you shouldn't keep repeating it for a meditation. And then it explains a meditation repeating the Shema.
Because
So
you're looking at different authors and different.
Oh, I see.
So we're going to get to, and actually that's a great segue into tonight. But so hold on to that. How are you doing with it? You okay? Are you okay?
It'll be better soon.
Anything we can do to help?
I think so.
Okay, so you can always call me.
You have them. The
Oh.
brothers. Yeah, they're getting theirs. But it was their turn to come to the house and pick and choose.
Oh, I missed the one.
Shelley wanted the fixture off the ceiling. Oh, who wants that? What? What? The fixture?
But they don't have rights to it, do they?
No, we don't.
So why are you being okay? This is a great also segue.
Okay.
How are you guys doing with meditation? You guys weren't around.
We were here for.
Okay, all right.
Only are gonna
Here,
be
take this
finished. I'm
aside.
reading.
Okay, so
I'll take it.
Oh,
Did you get-
thank
all
you.
right, so
That's the last one.
both great segues. What do we do as Jews? What do you think our response is to that which is not okay? Well, if you see a crime being committed, what's our response? Obviously, we try and do good deeds, right?
Mhm.
Okay. What if you're seeing a bad deed happen? What's the Jewish response to that?
I don't know if it's a Jewish
We would call it
response,
out.
but I would,
It's not, doesn't depend. It's to fix it.
yeah.
If it endangers your own life.
That you don't, well, you don't try and endanger your own life, but it would, depending on what it was, possibly.
Okay, that's what I mean.
Yeah, depending on what it was, possibly, yes, but no, so, I mean, you're right on that. You're correct in that. But we're not talking about, in your case, something that's endangering your life. I don't think, are they?
No.
Okay. So our response is love. Okay. But what is love in Judaism? It's action. It's not words. It's not a feeling. It's action. There's two aspects to love. I actually gave a high holiday sermon on this. I don't know how many years ago. When you love someone or something, you have two things that you do. You proactively show them that you love each other, right? You proactively show each other you love each other, and you protect them, right? And both of those things are true, right? And so if someone is attacking that which we love, it is our job to protect it. That's not just about loving people. It's also about loving God. I love God, so I have an obligation to call out, and I love Judaism and I love Torah. So I have an obligation, whether I like it or not, to, and I love the idea of being proactive. Look how much I love God. Look how much I love, and share that love with everybody, right? I do that all the time, don't I? That's another part. I have an obligation to call out the opposite. I don't speak or write because I want to. I do it because I have no choice. Just like if, God forbid, someone was attacking her, you would have no choice but to defend and protect her, right? God forbid you would protect him. So when we see something being done that's wrong, it's our obligation to do it. So, Rabbi Ronnie Stern once made a great comment that the foundation of chesed, remember we talked about chesed, compassion, when we talked about the energy centers, is bina, is judgment. Ethical behavior is the foundation of compassion in Judaism, not the other way around. Not that compassion leads to ethical behavior. It doesn't. Ethical behavior leads to compassionate actions. You're dealing with people who are not very good with boundaries. They've demonstrated that repeatedly. Right?
Yeah.
Why let them? And that's a question you don't need to answer, but
Okay.
think of what they did at the funeral.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
And by the way, thank you again for what you did.
Just again, that goes back to what's the definition of love? Proactive, in that case,
Yeah.
protective. And it's up to you if you want to share anything or not. It doesn't.
We're on a roll now.
So we're on a roll. Butter our tuchus. So think about it. So in Judaism, the more compassionate thing you can do is to have boundaries. So I'll use what we were talking about earlier. I'm not going into that talk saying I need to be compassionate with her. I'm going to that talk saying you need some boundaries, and I'd like you to have them because it would benefit you, me, us, and the world. So remember, we talked back in Talmudic times. Everything builds on everything. You notice that?
Mhm.
About the idea of creating a fence around the Torah,
Mm.
right? And the simple example is why is chicken considered meat? Right? We build a fence around the Torah. It's like building a pool fence. Remember we talked about all that?
Yep.
Okay. So we just got through talking about and spending a few weeks on meditation and mysticism, which is excessively and extremely intimate, personal, and powerful. Okay, because of your own personal experience, because of what you experience, what you do, all these different reasons. And anything that is intense and intimate and powerful isn't always used for good, is it? Right? A man is born in 1626. He may be the most important figure of the last 1,000 or 2,000 years to Judaism, and most people don't know his name. Okay? His name is Shabbatai Zvi. May his memory be blotted out. So let's talk about who this is. Remember, this is on the heels of Isaac Luria and the whole mystical movement in Spot and meditation and Lurianic Kabbalah, combining different techniques from Maaseh Bereshit, the workings of creation, how and why did God create the world, Maaseh Merkavah, how and why did God sustain the world, all these different things, the Shema, all these different stuff. It's all been in this flowering that comes out of the 16th century, right? And it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and it's now made it much more easy and accessible for people because it's now kind of not, I don't want to say codified, but it's kind of outlined, right? It's diagrammed. And this out of this flowering of Jewish mysticism, which we now often call Kabbalah, but as we've talked about, really meditation and mysticism is a better term. Out of that flowering and what's going on comes this guy, Shabbatai Zvi. Now, who is Shabbatai Zvi? Shabbatai Zvi is a rabbi, so to speak. And he's clearly a mystic. He's clearly also paraschizoid. Okay? Seems to be he's bipolar to the extreme. And certainly bipolar, I'm sorry, I had it backwards. Certainly bipolar and probably paraschizoid. He is, but he's very charismatic. Okay, as oftentimes those kind of people can be. Right? And he starts teaching Jewish mysticism. And he starts teaching this intensity, some of these techniques. Well, we all drive, right? And my boys, thank God, are 14. And at some point in the next couple of years, God willing, they will learn how to drive and they will have their own cars or they'll share a car. It's actually more likely, God willing, and they'll be driving, right? So how many of you are parents? Okay. So I want your advice. Do you think, if I could afford it, do you think that I should get them a Lamborghini or Ferrari as their first car?
Oh, no.
Why? No, I ask why. Besides the fact that's more than I make in 4 years.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think that it's any kind of a car like that, besides it being showy, makes them be potentially a target, but people don't know how to handle a vehicle. like
Okay,
that.
go on with that. What do you mean they don't know how to handle it? They're 16. What do you mean they can't handle it? They got a driver's license.
Oh, no,
No
that car
experience.
has so much power that it's like, I don't think I would even want to drive a Lamborghini.
Okay.
It's better to walk before you can run.
That's a good one. What about, what do you?
Yeah.
I was just thinking that they won't be very useful to them. It's not like you can take that just anywhere. You can't take everybody for a ride because you can't fit anybody in the car.
Well, they make a Ferrari SUV now,
Who knows?
so they could put their golf clubs in it.
Okay.
I mean, because that's really what it comes down to, right?
That's
So
right.
Yeah,
That's
I
right.
can't take people for a ride. I apologize.
it's okay.
I'm
So
sorry,
so
21. But they can't. It's not useful. It's just you would always be worried about it getting dinged or whatever. You can't just take it for quick and go get groceries for your mom or do an errand for you.
boy, are you good? You're assuming that they would do such a thing. So it's not practical. You need to walk before you run. It's too much.
Experience. Yeah.
Okay. So having an intimate spiritual, when we talk about Yehud, unification with God, is a powerful, very powerful experience. People have it when they have taken different psychotropics or hallucinogens, right? And what happens with a certain percentage of people who take psychotropics or hallucinogens? What's happened to them? They've gone crazy.
They lose their mind.
Right.
They've lost their mind, or they've done stupid things, or they've died, or they've had an experience and they go flying out a window, right? Or they do. So it doesn't make sense. Well, there's a process, remember, that you want to learn. So you build up, you walk before you run, as you said. So the same is true with having a conscious, deep experience. We could fall into a deep experience. That's great. But to actually try and have that happen, you want to kind of build up to it. And you want to have the tools to integrate it, right? The problem's not, right? The problem of flying is not flying. The problem is landing, right? So this is, okay. Now, what does that mean? And how does that affect us? And you had asked the question, how did you phrase your question, which you phrased so beautifully that I said is a great segue.
Oh, the Shema.
Why the Shema? On the one hand, it says it shouldn't only be said twice a day. On the other hand, this is a meditation. It's because of this man, Shabbatai Zvi. So Shabbatai Zvi is this very, very charismatic guy. And I forget if he's living in Turkey but he's living, where the sultans are. And the Ottomans, and he starts leading people to have transcendent experiences. And he says, you know what? Great experience, wasn't it?
Yes,
Because of me, you know that, right?
of course.
Okay. It's because of me. That's what he starts saying.
Mm.
And he develops a following. And you tell her, check out this technique I learned. And she has this experience. He says, that's because that was gifted to me by the great Rabbi Shabbatai Zvi, because he is so holy. And she has that experience. And who are you crediting it to? Shabbatai Zvi. And you say, let me teach you this experience, this great technique, because of this Shabbatai Zvi, because as long as we're connected to him, wow, we have direct connection with God. And you have this experience. You say, oh my God, he must be Mashiach. He's Messiah. And you go to her and you say, check this out, this experience. And she does it. And she goes, everything opened up. I saw colors brighter. And how did you know? It's because of Shabbatai Zvi. He's Mashiach. And he develops 2 million followers,
Hmm.
mostly in the Ashkenazi world, even though he himself is Sephardic.
Hmm.
Sorry.
You know, I always like to remind people that Jesus seemed to have done just fine without social media, right?
Exactly. Obviously,
You got
so
around.
did
Okay.
advertising.
How
So
many
sh-
Jews at that time?
I'd have to look, but it's like a third of Judaism at that time. I mean, it's not. It's a huge.
Less than 10.
So now, the head of the Ottoman Empire and the sultans, they have a problem with this because now he's a political movement,
Mhm.
right? Now he's got an army that if he said go, they would go. Now he's bipolar. He's high and he's low, and he's got an aide that's always, you know, that's his great PR guy, and you know, he's obviously not well, but he has these visions or experiences, and you know, he starts saying, "Oh, I am the Messiah." So you can tell her, and you can tell him, and you can tell her, and you can tell him that I am the Messiah. In fact, those days that are fasting days were taught, like Tisha B'Av will be a feast day in the world to come after Messiah comes. You can feast now, and apparently he had orgies and all sorts of things.
Nice.
What's the problem with that? You're with the Messiah. Sound like other cult leaders we have heard of in the last century, right? Only he's bigger than any of them, and you know he's gonna, so he is brought before the Sultan, who says, "Look, you know what? Maybe you're Messiah, maybe you're not Messiah, but I don't need a Messiah. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you think about it for a while, and you tell me if you're the Messiah or not the Messiah. I'm going to let you think about it in prison. And if you're the Messiah, it's no biggie because I'm going to kill you. And if you're not the Messiah, you'll convert to Islam and all is good. And then your followers will know you're not Messiah. I don't have to worry about the army." Smart move on the Sultan's part, right? So he contemplates this while he's in prison, and he converts to Islam. And 2 million Jews lose total faith in Judaism because their connection to Judaism is, I think I told you guys, there's a reason our pulpits are on both sides of the Torah. We ever talk about that? I don't remember. Okay. But that it's not, you know, it's not rabbi centric, it's God and Torah centric, and we're just on the side then. You know, and then if it's in the middle, that's a rabbi centric. The rabbi's the pathway to God, and that, as far as I'm concerned, is
So that was a large
makes-
portion of the Jewish community or Jews
his
in
time.
the world at the
Yes,
time.
yes. He almost single-handedly destroyed Judaism.
Wow.
So the rabbis, remember, most of what he affects is actually the Ashkenazi world, even though he himself is Sephardic. And so the rabbis, what do? We protect, right? We love Judaism, so we're going to protect Judaism. And then when you love, what do? You create a pool fence around the pool so that, right, we're going to create a fence for the Jewish people. So the study of mysticism, specifically in the Ashkenazi world, is forbidden. Until you are 41, have 3 children, know all of Torah and all of Talmud. Now, forgetting about the fact that Luria never made it to 41, forgetting about all those kind of things, they put a fence around to make it virtually impossible to actually study what we studied the last couple of weeks. And it's hidden. And they hide it in some of the liturgy, and it's there, but they you know, we're not going to go and break this apart because it's hidden in plain sight. And if you catch it, then you have your experience because you caught the. But they don't, and so as a result of this, you see why I say he may be the most important Jewish figure because he single-handedly almost destroyed Judaism, and as a result, from his time of the 17th century until the present, Jewish mysticism was put in a box and is not part of normative Judaism in the Ashkenazi world. Not so much in the Sephardic world. In fact, in the Sephardic world, if you go and read a traditional Mizrahi Siddur, it will have something like this at one point. It says God's name, it'll look like this. And then there'll be this squiggly right in there. So Yud He Vav, This hay is extended, and that's the meditation you're supposed to think about when you're saying God at that point. That's actually in the Sephardic Siddur.
Interesting.
Okay? But Ashkenazi, it's all Pimquan. So what happens? It develops a form of Judaism for the next 400 years that is without its heart of Yehud, the unification with God. And that becomes removed from Ashkenazi especially, but all Judaism, but especially Ashkenazi, because the fence, because we protect. And that's why Shema is only supposed to be said twice a day from this side. And from this side says, well, no, there are meditations that you do with the Shema.
See, I thought I was reading from all the same author.
No. So now does that make sense? To put it in that perspective? And it's because this guy Shabbatized me.
Right.
So he takes out the heart, and the rabbis are part of the concept of mitzvos or mitzvot based Judaism is if you do the commandments, it will lead you to an awareness. As opposed, and that there's a truth to that potentially, but as opposed to if you have the awareness, it will lead you to want to do the commandments. Okay, and both are true, but Judaism is very much action based. So if you do the commandments, that will lead you to awareness. If you give, we believe that the more you give, the more you love, not the more you live, the more you give. The more you give to someone, the more you will love them. Okay, that's Jewish theology. So it changes what Judaism is in the world at that time, and all the way to now. In the 1990s, you have Kabbalah.
Right.
Kabbalah. So
Wasn't it before the 90s?
it really gets going into the 90s.
Yeah, Madonna. We were talking about Madonna earlier.
Right.
She was one of them, yes.
Right, because it's so easy. You guys, what you studied, how easy is it if you can't even read Hebrew? If you don't even know what the Hebrew letters are.
Right.
So I'm going to take the water and put it in the sanctuary. That will make it extra holy because we've been praying there. And now I can sell it at $6 a bottle, and it only cost me 60 cents. It's called Kabbalah water. That is not a joke. That is a real product, or was a real product. And so now you start getting, well, okay, maybe we can get more people involved to understand. There were rabbis who started teaching me Jewish mysticism right after my birthday, after my bar mitzvah. Okay. So I have been studying this for almost 5 decades. I started teaching it in my late 20s, early 30s, because people said, you got to start teaching this, and only teach very, very basic stuff. Because it's a lifetime process, and the world we live in. But the idea is that they put this fence around it, and that creates a challenge in Judaism. The manifestation of that challenge would be, did anyone grow up here in a classic conservative synagogue? Grew up in a classic conservative synagogue. Well, then you probably didn't even get bar mitzvah.
I did not.
Grew up in a classic.
Probably.
Okay. And did you ever hear, you're going to learn how to daven whether you know what it means or not?
Right. I don't know.
And do you remember it? No, because it had no meaning. So actually, there was a man who once said at a board meeting, not here, elsewhere, who actually said, I had to suffer in religious school. My son better learn how to suffer in religious school. Now, how is that going to encourage people to wanting to be active Jews? Right? You're not making it inspiring. You're not making it user-friendly. You're not making it accessible. You're making it. But that's what our Jewish world is, isn't it? Isn't our Jewish world, you get your kids to go through the bar mitzvah factory so you can check the box and say they had a bar mitzvah? Speaking of Orlando, would you please remind me about sitting down with Jennifer and Danielle? Thank you, just in case I forget. Thank you. Because I would like to sit down with him this week and next week. So thank you. He takes such good care of me. So why is that going to inspire any kid to want to stay in Judaism after the bar mitzvah? It's not. And what have we all experienced? One and done. Right?
Right.
Exactly.
right? I'm not. It's not.
Unless you had your youth group that you hung out
Okay.
with and went through the confirmations.
Or
it was a social.
the two
thing.
biggest things that kept Jews involved and became committed to Judaism. One started in the 50s, one I think in the 80s. One in the 50s, Jewish camping,
Mhm.
going to Jewish camp. And the one I don't think it started till the 80s, birthright.
Yeah.
Send them to Israel for a free trip.
Mhm.
They think they're going to go party and they come back committed to Israel. Okay. So,
Or God willing, with a deeper understanding of what Israel is as our son. That finally,
he got it.
he finally got it. Yeah.
That's it. We're going to send Candace Owens to Israel. Birthright. She's been, by the way. It doesn't really matter. So when you look at that, this all stems from Shabbatai Zvi. The fact that we have problems with people falling in love with Judaism, seeing the value of Shabbat service, seeing the value of our teaching, whatever it may be, is a direct relationship because it's not being taught from that way from the time they're young, and as a result, that's a direct, has a direct correlation to Shabbatai Zvi doing what he did, and so the rabbis having to create a fence, and so it lost its heart. Now you know why I say he may be the most important. Certainly not the best, but he may be the most important.
And most rabbis don't even know what you just said.
About Shabbatai Zvi?
Well, no.
Most
took
studies,
the heart out of it.
no, most in rabbinic school learned about Shabbatai Zvi. He was a false mystic. He called himself a false messiah, and so he
But I mean about this mysticism being the heart of Judaism.
No, they don't. Okay, now everything goes. We know homeostasis, right? We know everything bounces back and forth and forth. He dies in 1676, and two things happen within a few years. Okay, first one is in 1729. A man named Moses Mendelssohn. Actually, I spelled that wrong. S-O-H-N. Moses Mendelssohn is born, and he really, along with other people, is in Germany, and these people, part of the Enlightenment movement, because what's going on in the world in the 18th century, right? The whole Enlightenment world, and look how intelligent we are, and scientific. So he and some other guys in Germany, they determine that, you know what? Because remember, the heart's out of Judaism by this point, right? So remember that. Judaism, it's archaic. It really doesn't pertain to us. We're 18th century intelligent Germans. It really doesn't matter. And it says in the Talmud, it says in the book of Deuteronomy and Parsha Shoftim, as we studied, it says you shall go to the judge of your time and do what he says left or right. Remember that?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it says in Talmud, right? It says, stay out of it, stay out of heaven. Lo ba shamayim he. Remember? You gave us the Torah to interpret. Remember that? About the oven? Right? And God says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's right in every place. And they say, Lo ba shamayim he, it's done in heaven. You gave it to us to interpret. And they say, we're going to use those words of Torah. We need to reinterpret Judaism for our intelligentsia of the 18th century German. Because we are Germans who happen to be Jewish. Excuse me. Okay, I apologize. We are German. And so we are going to reform Judaism. We are going to have our services. None of us understand Hebrew that well. Our fathers taught it has no meaning. Now, when we learn the letters and we see the value and the power of the letters, it inspires us to want to learn more Hebrew, right? But if you've taken that out of Judaism, then why am I even inspired to learn Hebrew? If I haven't looked at the subtleties of the language of Torah, that it says you shall love the Lord your God, not with all your heart, but with levavcha. Remember we studied that? If I'm not doing it in Hebrew, what do I care if I don't understand the Hebrew, right? So we are reforming Judaism. We are going to do our services in German. We are no longer going to wear a yarmulke. We are going to cut our payas. These are archaic symbols of a past. We are intelligent Germans. Kashrut, that was for when there was trichinosis and when it wasn't healthy. We do not need that. and they reform Judaism. Okay. By the way, for the next number of classes till we're finished, we're going to be bouncing back and forth in time frames, just so you know. It's not going to be so linear time frame. We're going to reform Judaism. Anyone who's not like us, we're going to call Orthodox. Okay? We are reformers. We, in fact, in some cases, they even did Shabbat on Sundays to be like their German neighbors. Okay? I grew up at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. I don't know how many of you know Wilshire Boulevard Temple or know what it was. Okay. Edgar Magnin had more knowledge than most Orthodox rabbis today. Let's just be clear about that. He was the one who built Wilshire Boulevard Temple. However, Rabbi Magnin also met people where they were. So everything was in English. Reform rabbis in the 70s and before that, they didn't wear tallis, and they usually didn't wear a yarmulke. They wore choir robes. Do any of you remember that? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They wore choir
I don't
robes.
remember no.
My bar mitzvah is in a choir robe with a tallis, because I got a bar mitzvah tallis, but in a choir robe, in a black clergy, like, I don't know what you call it. I think it was a choir robe.
Choir robe. Yeah.
Okay.
Surplice, is it? You call it surplice?
It's a big black tent thing that you put on that's like
Oh, right.
fake satin, fake silk, or whatever. Anyhow, and that and everything's in English. Look at. Do we have one here?
I just don't remember it.
Let me see if we
I
have one
always
here.
remember.
I
Rabbi
suspect we
Mallow
do.
No, but I mean,
Choir
I
robe
went to Wilshire Boulevard Temple with friends. I went all over the place.
Here
to
are
other
two
days.
Union prayer books.
Oh yeah.
Two of the Union Prayer Book 1 and Union Prayer Book 2.
What's the dates? Give us some dates.
I grew up. I was born in 63,
Yeah.
so I can't talk about. I can talk with authority about my term, but this is happening now in the mid 18th century.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I was just trying to remember, like, was that
Here,
before him or-
share a Union Prayer Book and look at the language.
Mhm.
Thou who hast loved us with all thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I commandeth to you this day shall be upon thy heart, and they shall speak. You shall thank you.
I'm very sure.
You shall speak of them when you sittest by the house, when you walkest by the way, when you liest down, and when you risest up. You remember?
Oh yeah.
Where'd you grow up,
We
which temple?
repeated it.
Well, it was a reformed show in Culver City, but it was very traditional.
But that was the translation,
That was the
wasn't it?
translation.
That was
And with the choir
I'll
robes.
never forget it. The rabbi always wore, but he always wore kippah.
They don't always wear kippahs.
Didn't always wear tallit, but unless it was
Rabbi
Torah.
Mello did.
Only
But
when
it's-
the
it-
Torah- only when the Torah was out.
But you guys did you guys know each other back then?
Yeah, well, we met in the early '80s, so we.
I was bar mitzvah in '73.
Right, but we did.
So,
But I mean,
yeah,
no, I didn't
yeah.
know you when
I
then.
was like they're part of the Jewish youth group together.
But I
Maybe.
went to.
That would give me a warm fuzzy.
Yeah.
Okay, but look at these translations. Okay,
But we did meet at a camping weekend for kids put on by one of our friends. You know, there's. Yeah.
this is if you look at the English, this
Yeah.
is.
So what
Yeah.
I grew up with is
Oh, where's this? Let me see if
Like
there's a
Raymond
Silverman.
James Bible or something.
Let me see if there's a Silverman. Okay, I think it's. Let me see if this is the Silverman box.
Kills
Okay,
me.
this was the. Is this Silverman? I think this is the Silverman. Let me just see. I'm pretty sure. Oh no. So the Silverman Moxor in the conservative movement, the language is the same type of, as thou didst
Yes.
worship our fathers. It's Episcopalian. It's Catholic. Because we're Germans who happen to be Jewish. And we want to, the dirty A word, assimilate. So how that turned out for them in Germany. Huh? So we want to, and this happens. And so they are reformers, and anyone who's not like them is Orthodox. Okay? So now you got two movements, Reform and Orthodox. And then by the time you get into the mid to late 1800s, so the 19th century, you have a group of people, mostly in England and some in America, who say, you know what? We are not as observant as these Orthodox guys. but were more conservative than these Reform guys. And so now you have the birth of conservative Judaism. People think mistakenly that everybody in the world was Orthodox, and then it kind of got watered down, and there were some conservative, and then it got watered down further and became Reform. That's not what happened. There was just Judaism. These guys decided to call themselves Reformers and everybody else Orthodox, and then came in conservative. So the problem with the conservative movement, which was the biggest movement in this country in the first half of the 20th century, is that the entire movement is a via negativa. The entire movement is we're not this and we're not that.
Right.
Okay, so what are you? So what happens is by the time you get in, the conservative movement is supported by, in the early 20th century, you have the first part of the 20th century, you have all the families who've come in with the immigrations from Russia, right? You're going to learn to daven, or your Uncle Tevye died in a pogrom in Spain. Okay, so it's out of guilt. It's not out of inspiration. Remember, we've taken that heart out of the world, right, out of the Jewish world. So now we get to that part, we get to post-World War II, 50s, 60s. So you're going to learn to daven, or Uncle Shmuley died in Auschwitz in vain. Sorry, right? Doesn't matter. It's built based on guilt. And then what happens? Where does the conservative movement, what keeps it alive once you get into the 80s? Does anyone know what community keeps it alive? The Persians. You're going to learn to daven, or Uncle Hussein died in vain in Tehran. It's based on guilt. So why is anyone going to keep doing that for the extension of their lives? Right? So this all stems from, we took the heart out by removing the mysticism, by building the fence, which had to be done. We had to protect it. We had to make sure another Shabbatai Zvi didn't show up, God forbid. But we put such a big fence that it took out the heart of Judaism, and people didn't learn it. And so then you have the Reform, and then you have the conservative movements that come out. So why does the conservative movement effectively die by the time you're in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s? And it is effectively dead today? Absolutely. Because it no longer does that guilt work. Uncle Tevye, Uncle Shmuley, and Uncle Hussein.
Is that the biggest grouping of shoals that
No, it
that are
was.
merging, that are
Yes, that are merging,
together to
yes.
stay
So you get
alive?
all these synagogues that purchase property in the 50s for cash that end up merging and merging and merging, or going out of business entirely, or selling. They have their Friday night Shabbat,
Right.
but they sell but 6 days a week it's the church, right? And so this is what happens in Judaism, and because if you're now, I believe there is a place for the conservative movement. By the way, I believe that there is a place, and that the place is text-based in English. I believe there is a space that is not, or that, as Rabbi Shulchat calls, for non-practicing Orthodox Jews or non-observant
It's
Orthodox
interesting
Jews.
that Rabbi Shulchat says that. Yeah.
Michael, there's really, there's the secular, then there's the observant, and then there's, non-practicing Orthodox Jews.
We don't, growing up in a conservative synagogue, even though I went all the way through but didn't become a bat mitzvah, and he grew up Reform, but very traditional and observant with things, not keeping Shabbos all the time, but his mother kept kosher, and they went to temple all the time. But for us, when we started looking for ourselves and for our kids, Reform was to Reform. I'm like going to church, and I certainly was not going to be Orthodox. I wanted to be with my husband and not the mechitza down the middle, and we'd and there's just certain things. So it sort of felt a little more natural, but in an odd way. And now maybe that explains why I sort of feel like it's still odd, even though it feels more right than the other two choices.
So I think Shulchat defined Shomrei Torah, if I recall correctly, as
Well,
an
we met him at CBK,
but as an Orthodox rabbi in a conservative synagogue with Reform congregants.
But there were, I would say.
Oh, no, they had a
big
lot of
part of the
reserve-
population was conservative to the right.
Only conservative synagogue in the city that had daily minions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
because that's who Shulchat is.
right.
Because that's who he is.
Yeah.
But so the conservative movement was defined as what you're not, and that's not a way to sustain yourself for any length of time, is it?
So what is Ner Simcha?
We're not.
Right.
In the
Jewish.
late 90s, early 2000s, you start having synagogues pop up that are called post-denominational or trans-denominational. Okay. Look, everyone's arms are crossed. Is it cold in here? Or it's just everyone doesn't like it. Okay.
It's just kind
So-
of like I say, it holds me
so-
up. Right?
so-
It's mirror.
So think about what we do. I'm going to use Talmud and tobacco as an example. We are studying hardcore text in a cabana or outside at a bar smoking cigars. You wouldn't be studying it smoking cigars and drinking in Orthodox shul, and you wouldn't be studying Talmud at all in Reform. It's not about the denomination. I have said this many times. I will continue to say it my whole life. I suspect that it didn't matter to Hitler what your denomination of Judaism was, and it won't matter to the Messiah. May he or she come in our time. Why does it matter to us? Why should it matter to us? So there was a time when maybe the denominations were helpful, but they're not today.
No.
They're really not. The only advantage of the denomination is that for sales purposes and marketing purposes, you have an idea in theory. Reform Temple's going to do this, and the Orthodox Temple's going to do this. And do you know how you originally, how through most of the 20th century, how you recognized Reform, Orthodox, or conservative synagogues? Orthodox was called a shul,
Sure.
right? Conservative was called a synagogue or a congregation, and Reform was called a temple. Because you didn't call anything a temple, because a temple is, there's only one temple in Jerusalem. So that's what it used to be. It's not true anymore. Because you have all these mergers that have happened, all these different temples. San Gabriel Valley is a great example. There are these certain temples that are having all sorts of problems and have had all sorts of problems. The vast majority of them have been formed because of 2 or 3 or 4 mergers. Because in the 1950s, they bought this property and they put this property, and there were Jews living there. And then, so
what about at time on Jan's?
Etzchaim as a conservative synagogue is attached to the
Mhm.
conservative movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adat Elohim is a Reform temple. It is attached to the Reform movement.
And Etzchaim is
Conservative.
Mhm.
Okay, it is attached to the conservative movement.
one of the rabbis, was one of my teachers when
Which one?
the original one.
Oh, whose name I'm blanking on, whose daughter's a rabbi,
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
who's a fabulous man,
Yes.
fabulous guy,
Yeah.
who they took horrible care of. They, yeah.
So the only problem I had with his classes was that we were supposed to do at least half an hour or 3/4 of an hour of Hebrew, and he would always get to 15 minutes with, "Oh, we should have done the Hebrew," but he was so interesting, so it didn't matter.
I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. It's a good man.
Oh,
But so yes, that's it.
Yeah.
So and there are rules if you're affiliated with one of those movements.
Mhm.
It's a union, and you have to hire a rabbi from
Mhm.
from the feeding school. If it's a conservative synagogue, your rabbi must be from what was UJ now HAU or JTS. If it's a Reform synagogue, it must be from HUC, unless you really have someone else that you like and you can't find someone from our movement. It's a whole union process, and so many of the synagogues are no longer involved. Like Wilshire Boulevard, I don't think they are now. I know for many years they stepped away and they weren't involved in the Reform movement. Their youth group, when I was a part of it, TAG, was bigger than all of SCFT, the Southern California Federation of Temple Youth. We were bigger than all of Southern California combined. But because there's also the camps and everything else is part. But so all of this stems from the mysticism, Shabbatai V, and then it being taken out. But you got a problem. You've got a big problem. there are always, thank God, people who want to say, yeah, but there's something else going on here. There's something else deeper here. I'm missing something. There's something in Judaism I'm not catching. It's so empty, but I know that it must be there. It's survived all these thousands of years. And they too end up finding a place because of a man who lives from 1698 to 1760, so roughly the same time as Mendelssohn in Germany. His name is Israel ben Eliezer. He's known as the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name. He is a mystic. He's a charismatic character. He's a miracle worker. That's why the master of the good name. What's the good name? Yud, He, Vav, and He, because he knows how to manipulate the letters in a certain way. He can create miracles. There's a great saying, one of my very favorite lines about the Baal Shem Tov. If you believe every story you hear about the Baal Shem Tov is true, you are a fool. If you believe none of them are true, you're a greater fool. Okay? And he's a great mystic. He takes the mystical teachings as kind of, Luria kind of combines them all, right? And his own experiences and being, this righteous, this tzaddik. And he starts teaching Judaism. And he says that what God wants is not your doing this, doing that. God wants devakut, cleaving. When we talked about Yehud, unification. God wants our cleaving to him. God wants our joy. It says in Psalm 100, King David says, the work of God is found in being happy. And God wants us to be happy, and God wants us to cleave with him, not have a kind of sort of relationship with him, not be like this, but cleaving. And every time in our history, when we haven't cleaved with God, we've had problems, without exception. And God, that's what God wants. And he teaches this. And he teaches it through a number of ways. And he's very observant, obviously, highly observant. But he teaches it in a number of ways. Two big ones. A nigun, a song without words. It's one of the Baal Shem Tov's. And he teaches it with stories. Isn't it interesting that it doesn't matter if we look back at the Buddha, at Jesus, at the Baal Shem Tov, they all use stories to teach. Right? And he is this hidden mystic from the first part of his life, and then he comes out and he's teaching. He says, well, God wants our joy. And he wants our faithfulness. And he wants our piousness. It's a great word, pious, which is related to the word for compassion in Hebrew. And so he wants us each to be what a term that is used actually in the Talmud. He wants each of us to be his chassid. Okay, his pious one. That's what a chassid means. And so we have the birth of the Hasidic movement. God doesn't want you to rush through your prayers. Oh, I got 14-year-olds, okay? They do the prayer affirmations. God doesn't want that. You try slowing down 14-year-olds, right? Guys, what does each word mean? And so the Hasidic world starts with him, and they spend inordinate amount of time. So that there's what is called kavanah. This is a hugely important word. And it is a word that is ignored all too often. It means intention. It says in Talmud, "Ein kavanah ein tefillah." If there's no intention, the prayer is not real. And the Baal Shem Tov says we need to increase our intention, our relationship with God, so that each prayer we find the depth of it, and we have devakut. So we have the Baal Shem Tov. And he becomes the founder of modern Hasidism. Okay? When he dies, he had two main disciples, Toldos and the Maggid, and some of the Hasids go follow this one, and some go that one, and then each of them, there are other guys who have their own, start getting them, and it actually becomes what's called Hasidic courts. Okay, they actually start getting all these things, and they're known by their writing names or by their, like the Yaakov Yosef Pona is known as the Toldos because he wrote the Toldos, which is about the generations. There's a guy named Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. If I remember, I always forget if he's the grandson or great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and he comes up. He's Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and he writes a wonderful book called the Tanya, where he talks about that when we look at the Kabbalistic understanding, that there are three major energy centers we need, Sfirot, that we need to focus on: Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. And so the people who follow that, are Chabad. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. I love Rabbi Nachman. Shlomo Kralbach used to say that everyone has two Rebbes. Your Rebbe and Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman, who teaches through stories so deeply and wonderfully, and we'll go through some of that next week as well. All these different Rebbes. Now, what is a Rebbe? In Hebrew, rabbi means my teacher. Rav means teacher. Okay? I am a teacher of teachers. That's in theory what a rabbi is. Okay? And Reb is like, how many speak Spanish? So Reb is like saying to someone, Don. Okay? It's a term of respect. It means you're a teacher, you're an elder, right? The best way of defining what a Rebbe is in the Hasidic world, which comes from the relationships of the Hasids to their Rebbe Baal Shem Tov, is, and there's some wonderful books written about it actually, that the best way to define the relationship is really the relationship between a guru and his disciple in India. The idea that your Rebbe knows more about you than you know. Okay? And so it's total trust. It's a relationship that is a very intimate, deep relationship. That's what it was originally. Okay? It was not Rabbi so-and-so of Chabad. It was my Rebbe Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Okay? You've heard people call the Rebbe. They're talking about Schneerson, who was the last head of Chabad. He was the Rebbe, who I never met, but apparently was one of those enlightened beings. I don't know if any of you met him. Apparently he gazed at you and he knew how to touch your soul when he wanted to. It was amazing. And that comes out of the Baal Shem Tov and about his stories and his song. There's this one rabbi named Yaakov Yosef, I believe it was, I'm pretty sure it was Yaakov Yosef, who really was very rigid, not a big Hasid kind of guy. And so the Baal Shem Tov went to his town. The Baal Shem Tov started telling stories, and people started gathering around. This is early morning. They started gathering around and gathering around and gathering around. And now the Gabbai has shown up and is listening to his stories, which would entrance you, take you, right? And now it's 7 a.m., 8 a.m., what's ever supposed to be. The rabbi, Yaakov Yosef, shows up and no one's opened up the temple. And so he's angry. He doesn't know what's going on. So the Baal Shem Tov realizes this and he ends the story. So, we're so late for Shachrit in the morning. Now I'll go to Shachrit. Oh, we're so sorry. Now Yaakov Yosef is really angry. And he's going to go confront the Baal Shem Tov. How dare you do this? This is how we're supposed to do Judaism. And he goes and he walks into the Baal Shem Tov's chamber, and as he's walking, he hears the Baal Shem Tov say, "Loosen the reins, the horse can't run. Loosen the reins of the horses." And it hits Yaakov Yosef so deeply that he realizes what he's saying is, how can the Jew run if you're holding him that tightly? How can he run to God? And so this man becomes a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. Wonderful stories. There's a beautiful book called Tales of the Baal Shem Tov, fabulous book by Buber. Another one, Tales of the Baal Shem Tov by Adin Steinsaltz, of stories about him. Reb Zalman Dr. Shalomi wrote his book. Holy, no, it wasn't Holy Fire. It was something Sacred Fire, but it wasn't Sacred Fire. But he writes a book. Oh, something in the Sacred Flame. But he writes a book where he tells stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And those stories and those things that starts to inspire people. And everyone relates to their own Rebbes. I relate to Rebbe Nachman. He was a mystic. He was very much into storytelling, into music. It's just what I relate to. I don't relate to Chabad so much, although obviously I do on a certain other level because Schwartzy was one of my teachers from effectively all my life and still now. So this is what becomes the Hasidic movement. So now we have, does everyone get how these guys are all related now?
Mhm.
And it's all a byproduct of first Luria and what goes on in Sfat and mysticism, and then Shabbatai Zvi doing what he did. And then the rabbis reacting to that, because there's always reaction. And so it ends up being we bounce back and forth to try and find balance. So you got Jews, right? And the Orthodox Jews. Well, they're not Orthodox, they're just Jews. And these guys say, okay, they're Reform and they're Orthodox, right? And then these guys say, okay, we're more conservative over here, right? And then you got over here, you start, and then all the past ones are not just this. Over here, you end up having Hasidic. They're very observant, but they're not, they're much more observant in some ways, but they're also about the intention. And then you have something that happens in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, which is, I told you we're going to be bouncing around because there's no other way to do this. I don't think. Probably is. I just don't. I'm not that smart. So in the 1960s or 70s, that time, 50s, 60s, 70s, what's happening in Judaism post-Holocaust? You're post-Israel. We haven't gotten to those yet per se, but different world. And you got a lot of Jews in America. And what happens in the world in the 50s and 60s and 70s? Yoga comes in. Let's get high, drop in, drop out, whatever the phrase was. What is it?
Feminism.
Feminism comes in. All this different stuff comes in, right? And there's this need. You got all these holy hippies. That's what Karl used to call them. You got all these guys who are Jewish. They're not finding any spirituality in the religion, right? That's been taken out. The Reform Jews, the secular Jews, or whatever, and they got nothing there. And they can't relate to Hasidic Judaism. It's all in Yiddish or Hebrew, right? So you got two men who knew each other. I assume they were friends, although there's not a lot of them together. Two men who changed things in that period, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You got a man named Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who is originally a Lubavitcher, a Chabad guy, and who really explores other traditions. He explores the Yoruba tradition. He explores Native American and knows Wallace Black Elk, blessed memory, and has been to a Sundance, and he was called by some people the acid dropping Rebbe. Okay, and he starts to try to renew Judaism through teaching and intellect. Someone's writing something.
Hi to all.
What?
Hi to all, Victor Black.
Hi, Hal. Hola. Alechem shalom. Or salam aleikum. Okay, so right, so he starts to try and renew Judaism. So we're gonna put an R here. So over here you're gonna have secular, right? They're totally disenfranchised from Judaism, and then you're gonna have these guys right here who are going to try and renew Judaism. And it's basically taking Hasidic Judaism and making it applicable and accessible to the secular Jew, teaching the depths of Judaism without any of these structures. So there's Kavanah, but there's Keva. Remember we talked about Keva being the structure of the Siddur. So he's doing that. And so Zalman is doing that on the one hand, and you have a book that comes out in the early mid-70s called the Jewish Catalog. I think, do we have a copy of the Jewish Catalog over there? I'm 90% sure we have a copy of the first or second Jewish Catalog in that bookcase. I could be wrong. That wouldn't be the first one or the last. Anyhow, he writes these guys do the Jewish catalog. It's a big book and a red cover, I think, if I remember right. I could be wrong on the red. And it's camp, because what's really working in the 50s and 60s? Camp, right? That's really keeping Jews Jewish. So he's appealing to all these guys who went to camp, couldn't find Judaism in their synagogue, and now are dropping acid, or are now whatever. He's appealing to them. He's getting the depths of the spirit of Judaism, but he's doing it without the rigor of the Orthodox or Hasidic. So Zalman's doing that, and then you got this guy named Shlomo Carlebach, who Matt played with for years. Our Matt. Carlebach. They made a Broadway show about him, actually. He was totally disrespected in his time. It wasn't until after he was dead he was given the respect he deserved. Carlebach, I can't say enough good about. Now, there are all sorts of controversies around Carlebach. Apparently, he had a high libido. But judge the water, not the pipe. Right? Water comes out clean, judge the water, not the pipe. And so Carlebach makes a choice. He is a Lubavitcher, and he makes the choice that he needs to do outreach to all of the Jews who are disenfranchised. And so he, like Zalman, starts to renew Judaism through song and storytelling. And I can't say enough good things about Carlebach. His stories and his Torah.
Where and when is this?
This is New York. They're both here.
New York.
So they're both here 50s, 60s. In fact, one of the things I love about Carlebach is one of his, and I just admire this, I just think it's cool. One of his dearest friends was Nina Simone.
Oh.
They were extremely close. Some say extremely close. That they knew each other in the biblical fashion. I don't know if that's true or not. And if it is true, God bless you, man, for going there. Because Nina Simone was about as cool as it got in the 50s, right? And, I mean, she was. Now, if you can find on YouTube, there's actually a video of Nina Simone singing Hebrew, performing in Hebrew as her tribute to Carlebach. And you can find the recordings of Carlebach singing Sinner Man. Do you guys know Sinner Man? So Nina Simone made an amazing version of Sinner Man that was used in the Thomas Crown Affair as music. Sinner Man gonna come to, Sinner Man, where you gonna come to?
Right.
Sinner Man, where you gonna come to? All along these days, come to the rock. Rock wouldn't hide me, I came to the rock. Rock wouldn't hide me, I came to the rock. Rock wouldn't hide me all along those days. The rock said, it's this great spiritual that Carlebach recorded.
Wow.
The story goes that he accidentally, in New York, walked into a place that she was performing as a young teenager because they wouldn't let her into music school because she's black. And she was this amazing pianist. So the story goes. And he was entranced with what she was singing. And said the story goes that they were talking. And she said, you can't. And he said, she's talking about her pain of singing and of her grandfather's house being burned and the pain in the South and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, I understand. She goes, you can't understand. And he goes, yes, I can. My grandfather's house in Vienna. And he talks about the Holocaust. And they developed an amazing friendship. Carlebach actually was this phenomenal teacher. I wish I had gone because I could have, and I didn't. He did a year tour with Yogi Bhajan Khalsa, who brought Kundalini Yoga to this country. That would have been a great lecture to be at, a fly on the wall. And he really, really uses song and storytelling. If you want to know Carlebach, talk to Matt. So one of the things Carlebach starts doing in the 50s and 60s is he starts taking, as part of his renewal of Judaism, and that's where you get the renewal movement.
Right.
And part of the way he renews Judaism is he says, he takes classic verses of Torah or teachings and he puts them into folk music. So he becomes friends with all the Woodstock guys, all the guys who from Woodstock, they're all
Spell his
friends.
name, please?
Shlomo, Shlomo, Carlebach, Carlebach. And so, L'man echai v're'ai, L'man echai v're'ai, Adabrana, 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 Shalom la, because of my brothers and friends, because of my sisters and friends. That's him. Okay. Return. We do so really high. All right. Return again. Return again. Return to the land of your soul. Karl Bach. He starts taking all these biblical verses and putting them in Hebrew and English, or Hebrew and English, and he starts putting them, and they become. He starts taking classic text and renewing it with popular folk music. Because of Karl Bach, in the 70s, you get a young woman named Debbie Friedman. Who's ever heard of Debbie?
Sure.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Okay. Shalom Raha Yisrael Amcha. Or and the children dancing with the timbrel, and the women dancing with the timbrels, followed Miriam Ash. Okay.
Doesn't she do the
Mishaberach by Debbie. She has tons of
Everything.
Everything. Yeah.
not by might and not by power. Which becomes all this becomes the soundtrack to camps of the 60s and 70s and beyond. Okay, you go into any temple, including certainly Reform, Conservative, and I think some Orthodox, and you'll hear Debbie's music. You might not hear an Orthodox shul. And you'll hear, but you'll hear it. You'll hear Karl Bach everywhere, and people are angry with Karl Bach at the time because he was so brilliant, and they wanted him to be this great Talmudic scholar. And he said, "It's not my tikkun. My tikkun is to go and the stories about him are beautiful." So it kind of becomes a circle, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because he takes the secular and brings renewal to them, and some of them become reform, and then it becomes a circle. And that's where your movements actually come from. The one movement I don't talk about is Reconstructionist because I honestly don't understand it. It seems to me like Judaism by vote, and I've never quite understood it. If you take God out of the equation, I lose where the Judaism is. Mordecai Kaplan in the 1950s at Jewish Theological Seminary. But these are the main movements that happen, and this is what happens, and it stems. But to understand how we get to where we are today, you need to understand that what happened with Jewish mysticism, Shabbatai Zvi, the fence around the Torah, how that creates both the Hasidic world, because there's no spirituality, and the Reform world, which says we're more German than Jews, and how that continues on. And I have said repeatedly, and I'm sad that was prophetic, because it's true now, that in my lifetime or my children's lifetime, I've said for years, that every American Jew will need to determine, are you an American who happens to be Jewish or a Jew living in America? And whatever you think you are, you need to recognize that the rest of America thinks you are a Jew living in America. And we're seeing that now, aren't we?
That direction versus the other direction? You think that the rest of the world thinks we're that?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
The rest of the world views us as the Jew living in America. And if you don't realize that, take a look at any daily news of what's going on. Okay, so, so there's this world that started in the 90s and 2000s of synagogues that are post-denominational or trans-denominational, which has a whole other connotation right now, so I don't like it. But that say, okay, you know what? I'm not Reform, and we're not conservative. We're not the movements. We've had a 3,700-year history of Judaism, right? The movements don't start till the 18th century, right? With Moses Mendelssohn. So in Germany, so if that's the case, effectively you're talking 7% of Jewish history. That's a blink of the eye. There were no movements pre the Reform movement. Everyone, you were a Jew, you were observant, you weren't observant, whatever it might be. So that's where I think we're going to end it tonight, because we've gone from Shabbatai Zvi all the way to the movements of today, and you can see how we bounce around. Does that help everyone a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys a special privilege after we turn off the video. So thank you. And so I'm going to give you guys